Okay, we are live streaming on Facebook. We are live streaming on YouTube. Of course, we're hosting the event on Zoom. I haven't yet figured out how to live stream on X or Twitter, but one of these days we'll get that figured out. But we're going to go ahead and start the program, and I want to keep the introductory remarks as short as possible, so we have as much time for Professor Roberts and for your questions as possible. So I want to welcome everybody for joining us today. My name is Tom Giovanetti. I'm the president of the Institute for Policy Innovation. We're a conservative free market think tank based in Dallas. I want to welcome you all to our Zoom policy briefing today entitled Who Was Adam Smith and Why Does He Matter? And our special guest today is Professor Russ Roberts, who is doing this live from Jerusalem, where it is about, what, 8 hours ahead of us here.
Yeah, it's 9 o'clock here.
9 o'clock p.m. So
Yep.
we appreciate Professor Roberts sacrificing part of his evening in order to do this with us. We really do appreciate you all being here with us, and I want to especially thank those of you who are financial supporters of IPI's work. We very much appreciate your support. You make these sorts of things possible. And if after this you decide you'd like to become a supporter, or you would like to know more about how you could join IPI, please contact me or anyone else at IPI, and we'll be delighted to tell you about more about our Giving Society and how you might be able to be involved. We will try to take as many questions from the audience as possible. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom navigation bar. It's nested under the More menu option. And if you try to use chat, if you use raise your hand, we may or may not get to your question. But if you put it in Q&A, we will get to it. This event is also being recorded, so you will be able to share it with other people who you think might benefit from it if they weren't able to join. It'll be hosted on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and just type Institute for Policy Innovation, you will find it. Okay, so now on to the program. There's a lot of focus right now in the United States on the fact that 2026 is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. I'm old enough to remember the 200th anniversary and all of the festivities that accompanied that. But it's also the 250th anniversary of the publication of a very influential book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, or most often known just by the title The Wealth of Nations, by Adam Smith. I'm going to resist the temptation to talk a lot about Adam Smith because that's not what I'm here for. That's what Professor Roberts is here for. But Adam Smith was an economist and a philosopher who a few years earlier also wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is actually one of my favorites. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. I'd love to go on and on about Adam Smith and how important he is and how influential he has been on not just economics, but also on, frankly, my personal economic worldview and the approach that IPI takes to issues. But I know that Professor Roberts will do a much better job of that than I will, so I will defer to him. Our presenter today is Professor Russ Roberts. He's a visiting fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, and he is president of Shalem College in Jerusalem and has been for 5 years. He's also the host of the EconTalk Podcast, one of the earliest and most successful podcasts focusing on economic issues. Although as time has gone on, he has broadened out the topics, and that's also been very interesting. Professor Roberts is the author of many books, including one called How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life. And he graced the Institute for Policy Innovation with his presence back in 2018 when he gave a talk at our offices on this issue of whether the U.S. economy was rigged in favor of the rich. That was back during the time when Thomas Piketty's work was getting a lot of attention about how the U.S. economy is rigged for the rich, and it was a tremendous presentation. Sadly, we did not record that one, so that's not available for you to see. But it was a real delight to have Professor Roberts live in our offices back in 2018, and we really appreciated that. Okay, that's enough from me. So with that, I'll turn things over to Professor Russ Roberts, and then we will have a moderated Q&A afterward. Russ, thanks so much for joining us today, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to IPI and everyone who's listening. I appreciate you coming out. Although that talk was not recorded, I do have a number of videos and essays on the complexity of trying to figure out whether the rich get all the gains, say, from economic growth, or whether the system is favors them unfairly. Certainly it does sometimes, but many of the things that people point to, there's certainly cronyism in unfortunately in capitalism and in a lot in, of course, other forms of government. But I think the challenge of measuring inequality, which was then and still is somewhat much talked about issue, I think it's very important to think about it carefully because it's easily distorted by misinterpretation of statistics. So I'm going to talk about Adam Smith, who he was and why he matters, mostly why he matters. You can say a few things about his life. He was born in 1723. He was born in Kirkcaldy, Scotland. He was lived in Scotland most of his life, toured Europe a little bit as the tutor of some English royalty. But most of his life, he sat in an armchair and talked to his friend David Hume, who's very good company, and who they shared a lot of similar ideas about how the world works. So what he's important for, of course, are his two books. There aren't many people, I would say, who there's only a handful whose entire output is so small and yet his influence is so large. Darwin comes to mind, but Darwin wrote actually quite a bit of things. They aren't still well read, but really Smith, he wrote two books. Now, one of them is really fat. So The Wealth of Nations is a very large book. I would add, I'll mention this again at the end, but I would add that even though his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, was written in 1759, and The Wealth of Nations was written in 1776, they're both very accessible for books written in the 18th century. There are sections of The Wealth of Nations that are hard to follow because the jargon in those days about various things are hard for us to understand. But most of his books, those two books, you can read just like you can read any kind of book. He's a very, very, very clear and entertaining writer. He's got a great sense of humor. So I recommend that you read some of his works in the original if you can. You can find them online. They're, of course, out of copyright. The book that you mentioned, Tom, How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life, was my attempt to make the theory of moral sentiments more accessible and to apply it to everyday life. But you don't need to read my book. You could just read his, and I recommend it. So what I thought I'd do tonight is I'd look at four of Smith's big ideas. There are more than four. He has many big ideas, but I'll look at four of the most important. And I hope that after we've talked and you've had a chance to think and read some of Smith's works, they're not just interesting. They can really change the way you look at the world. So the first idea is often called spontaneous order. Sometimes it's called emergent order. I prefer emergent order to spontaneous order. And many people would use the phrase the invisible hand to describe Smith's insights into order. It's really not accurate. I would say most people, if you could ask them to say anything about Smith, they would say one of two things. They would either say he's the guy who believed in the invisible hand, and he's the guy who thought greed was good. He didn't think greed was good. And what he thought the invisible hand was is not what most people think it is today. So what most people think the invisible hand is today, when they invoke it, they usually mean that if you leave things alone, they turn out pretty well, which is true, I believe, for many things, not all things. I'll talk about a few of them tonight. But Smith, that's not what he meant by the invisible hand. So it's a little confusing and a little bit weird. Smith meant by the invisible hand that sometimes when you do things, there are consequences that happen that looks like someone's moving things around, but it actually is a consequence of what you put in motion, and it wasn't what you intended. And that's interesting. It's an interesting idea. But that's not what modern people mean when they mean the invisible hand. What they mean by the invisible hand in modern parlance is that things work out pretty well sometimes when you don't try to over-regulate or steer them. So the reason that disconnect is there is that it's such a good phrase for describing this idea of emergent order. So the idea of emergent order is that there are many things in the world that look orderly, that look like someone put them in place, that looks like someone designed them to achieve a certain thing, and yet they're not anyone's intention. Okay? So an example of this would be kind of a fun idea is like you own a house, you want to sell it. Who sets the price? Well, what do you mean who sets the price? You do, of course. It's your house. You decide what to sell it for, but it's not really true. The market sets the price, and that phrase is really not very helpful because what does that really mean? The market sets the price. Don't I write the price down when I enter the ad in the real estate situation on the real estate page or with an agent? Don't I decide the price? You do, but of course, if you decide a price that's way out of line with similar houses, similar quality, you're not going to be able to sell it. Or if you priced it too high. If you priced it too low, you'll have so many people trying to beat down your door. You're going to have trouble deciding who to actually is going to get it. So you try to find what's called, the market price. But who sets that? Well, we do, but we don't sit around and set it the way we would say in a family decide whether we're going to have sushi tonight or pizza, right? That we might take a vote, we might take turns. There might be an autocrat in the family, one of the parents who gets to decide what the meal is that night. But we decides in quotes, we determine the price of houses in a metropolitan area based on the supply and demand, our desires for housing, how many people want to live in the city, how many people want to leave the city. And that really complicated, unbelievably sophisticated process determines the price of a house of a particular size and square footage and nearness to attractions. And that's bizarre. Isn't there somebody whose job it is to figure out what the price of the house is? It makes sense when you look at the prices that houses sell for. Bigger houses sell for more than smaller houses. Houses in good locations sell for more than houses in bad locations. Houses near good school systems sell for more than houses near bad school systems. But who does that? Who fixes that? Who figures that out? And the answer is it's not any one person. It's not anyone's intention. There's no housing czar. So this is a very, very interesting idea. And once you hear it, and you can see it sort of everywhere, one of my favorite negative examples is the volume of noise in a restaurant. Like you go in a restaurant and certain restaurants are really loud and there's a cacophony and vibrancy and excitement to them. And some are quiet and subdued and not so loud. So who decides how loud they're going to be? Well, the diners do. A certain type of diner comes there. But if you say in a loud restaurant, because it's hard to hear, you stand up and say, okay, everybody, look. Let's just keep it down, okay? Well, within about 30 seconds, it's going to be at the same volume level it was before. So who decides what that volume level is? Well, no one person, not the owner of the restaurant, not the people around outside, just the people in the restaurant through their own choices. Similarly, one of my favorite examples is who decided that you can use the word Google, which is the name of a corporation, to describe a verb where you go look stuff up on the internet. And the answer is nobody did. It just became useful to have a word for it. And Google was a prominent search engine, so people started using it. What's interesting is that Google doesn't like that because it jeopardizes their ability to trademark their name. So they try to stop people. I'm told that if you try to write a memo inside Google and you use Google as a verb inside with lowercase g, you're getting in trouble. But they can't stop it. They're not in charge of it. No one's in charge of it. No one's in charge of usage. One of my favorite examples is that France actually has an academy of people whose job it is to decide what French is. Well, the French word for weekend is fin de semaine, means the end of the week. But for a lot of French people just say the weekend. And the academy doesn't like that. They can't stop it. They can't decide. They cannot decree. So language is not under any one person's control. It is emergent. Another fun example How many sushi restaurants are there in Biloxi, Mississippi? Well, there's some. There's a handful, and there's a bunch in nearby towns. I looked it up on Google Maps today. Who decides that Biloxi gets a sushi bar? Who is there like an institute or a ministry of sushi bars in the United States? No, of course not. There's no czar. No one decides that. How many does Manhattan have? Well, it's hard to count them, but hundreds. And that makes sense. You'd want probably, you don't know anything. Most of us don't know anything specific about the love of raw fish in Manhattan versus Biloxi. But if I have to guess, I'd say it's probably a little higher in Manhattan. So you want more sushi bars in Manhattan than you have in Biloxi, but no one's in charge of making sure that's what actually happens. And you want to make sure there's some in Biloxi, but not a whole lot, because there won't be enough business for them. So there's a process, an underlying process. Supply and demand is a fancy way of saying it, but it's not very helpful. But basically, if there's room for another sushi bar, someone could come in and make money and make a profit. And if there isn't room, after a while, if there are too many, then they lose money, and they're naturally directed, as if by an invisible hand, to open sushi bars in Manhattan if there aren't enough, or close them in Biloxi if there are too many. And that's an amazing thing we never think about. It's happening all around us. And the last example I'll use, which I love, well, maybe two more. One of my favorite examples is, how come when you go into Staples or Walmart and you ask for a pencil, they sell you. You say, where are the pencils? Oh, they're all 7. Go over there. By the way, there's not just one pencil. There's mechanical pencils, and there's pencils made out of wood, and there's pencils made out of plastic, and there's number 3 pencils and number 2 pencils, and there's fancier ones with better graphite inside them, and there's not so fancy ones. They're cheaper. You have an immense amount of choice. So what should have happened, or could have happened, is that when you go into Staples and ask for a pencil, I assume they still have Staples in the United States. I haven't lived in the United States in 5 years, so I'm kind of dating myself. But anyway, if you go into Staples, they never say, well, we don't have any pencils. Well, what do you mean you don't have any pencils? Oh, well, the Chinese got them all. Well, what do you mean? Well, in China, over the last 20 years, this is an amazing thing. In China, over the last 20 years, 300 million people or so moved from the countryside into the cities. And a lot of them had kids. And so a bunch of kids who used to help out on the farm and never went to school start going to school. And once they go to school, they need pencils. So it would be totally reasonable that you couldn't get a pencil in the United States for a couple of years because they're all sold in China. But that isn't what happens at all. You get a pencil whenever you want. And in America, and in many places in the world, you get anything you want anytime. How come they don't run out all the time? How come they run empty shelves all the time? In fact, the empty shelves are, in places where there are people in charge, like Venezuela. It's like a dictatorship. So why, or used to be, I don't know what they have right now, but what a strange thing that there's plenty of pencils in the world. How does that happen? Who's in charge of it? Who's the pencils are? But nobody. And the last example I love is when you walk across a college campus, you'll see sometimes there's regular sidewalks, and then sometimes there's dirt paths. So why is that? Why are some things paved and some things aren't? And the simple answer, of course, is that the students, they want to go somewhere. They just cut across the lawn if there's not a sidewalk there, and eventually the grass gets worn down and there's a path. So I never knew this until I prepared this talk. They're called desire paths because that's where people desire to walk. The architects, the people in charge, they laid out a certain set of paths, but the people voted with their feet, literally, and made paths elsewhere in different parts of the university and in other parts of the world, not just in universities. Obviously, this happens. And that's a crazy thing. It's like, who decided there should be a path there? Well, the people did by wearing down the grass. And a lot of the things in the world around us are driven by the choices we make where we wear down the grass, and those become the norms and the way things work. So that's Smith's first idea, emergent order. Some things that look like order, that look orderly, that look like somebody designed them, are just the result of choices that individuals make that accumulate. And Adam Smith had a compatriot, Adam Ferguson. Where's the quote here? Can't find my quote, but Adam Ferguson had a beautiful phrase that some things that exist in society are the result of human action. And here it is. It says, nations stumble upon establishments, which are indeed the result of human action, but not the execution of any human design. So there are many things in the world around us that people create, people cause them, but they're not anybody's choice, any one person's. They weren't ordered from the top down. And that's an amazing thing. And it creates a lot of order around us that lets us lead our lives, and we never appreciate it. Okay, that's idea number one. Idea number two, exchange, swapping things, buying and selling things makes us rich. So imagine you have 100 people on a desert island. It's a beautiful island, it's full of resources. There's fish everywhere. There's coconuts in the trees. And on this island are 100 people, and they're incredibly talented. You can pick them. You can pick people of any skill you want. So how rich are those people going to be, these incredibly skilled people? The answer is not very rich. Their standard of living is going to be pretty low. They might survive, but they're not going to have any of the conveniences of modern life. They're not going to have eyeglasses. They're not going to have refrigeration, antibiotics, smartphones, or at least they wouldn't have been able to develop them. They're going to live a scale of life much closer to the Middle Ages than modernity. And the reason that we live so much richer, and this is really the focus of Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, is that we could trade with a lot of people. If you can't trade with a lot of people, you can't specialize. If you can't specialize, you're going to be poor. We're rich, in most of us in modern life, and most of us, even poor people in modern life, are richer than most of the people who ever lived in human history. The poorest among us in the United States, in a wealthy country, have access to incredible things that the richest people of, say, 1500 couldn't have. The reason that exists is because we can specialize. We can do certain things extremely well, get better at those things, and trade for the things that we don't make and the services that we don't aren't able to do by interacting with others. This is really Smith's central insight, that the division of labor, how specialized we are, depends on what he called the size of the market. And the right way to think about that is that when you have a large enterprise and you're doing a lot of things, you're producing a lot of output, you can divide the tasks that create that output into finer and finer gradations of skill, and that will allow people to specialize in them, get better, and you can allocate people to the things where they're most productive. And of course, we don't have a czar of employment in capitalist countries either. So that's a whole separate emergent order, that the allocation of people to various tasks in a modern economy gets done in a remarkably effective way, driven by the wages of different jobs and driven by the fact that some jobs are more pleasant, more fun. So we, meaning modern people, we trade with billions of people. On your island, your desert island, you can trade with another 99, the talented people around you. But there's not enough activity in that world. You're going to end up in that world of 100 people on the island, people having to do many, many things for themselves, which is lovely, can be fun, but you can't be rich. And by rich, of course, I don't mean rich in money, which is one of Smith's other deep insights. I'm not going to talk about it, but except in passing. But basically, wealth, as Smith saw it, and he was correct, is our command over goods and services, not how many pieces of paper we have. What we care about is how the pieces of paper, the dollars, what they can purchase, what they can allow us to enjoy. That was a wonderful insight of Smith. So prosperity comes from exchange, and international trade is just the same thing as trading with your neighbors, except you're doing it across borders. And Smith spent a huge part of his life and his book decrying what's called mercantilism, the idea that nations get wealthy by accumulating gold or pieces of paper, and that's not true. People get wealthy by having access to goods and services, and it's not the pieces of paper themselves, it's what they can purchase that we care about. And I'm going to cover two more ideas, and then I'll turn it over to questions. His third big idea was the danger of hubris. This comes from this idea comes out. It's implicit in in the Wealth of Nations in many places, but it's also explicit in the Theory of Moral Sentiments. The Theory of Moral Sentiments is about why we ever do anything nice for anybody else. Smith did not think people were selfish, and he didn't think greed was good, but he did think we were self-interested and that we naturally thought about ourselves more than we thought about the people around us. And the further we got from the people around us, the farther away they were in terms of family or emotional connection or nationality, the less we cared. Theory of Moral Sentiments in the opening has a famous example. It's a beautiful example. He says, if I tell you that 1 million people were killed yesterday in an earthquake in China, you go, oh, that's sad. That's horrible. That's too bad. And in modern times, you'd see it maybe on TV and it would pull at your heartstrings even more. But you'd go to bed at the end of the night. You might turn to your spouse and say, yeah, terrible thing about China, huh? And your spouse will say, yeah, it's a shame. And you go to bed and you sleep fine. But, says Smith, suppose I told you that tomorrow you're going to have your little finger removed in surgery. Well, you're not going to sleep at all. You're going to be a wreck. So obviously, you care more about your little finger than you do about 1 million people in China. And a lot of people end their insight about Smith with that fact. It's a fact. It's not a ugly opinion of Smith's. What is true is that for better or for worse, we as human beings care much more about what happens to ourselves often, not always, but often than what happens to people who are far away from us. The insight of Smith isn't that. The insight of Smith is, if that's true, if you can't sleep well, if you know you're going to have surgery on your little finger, and you can sleep like a baby if you heard that people in China are dying in an earthquake, why is it that if I gave you a chance to save your little finger by killing people in China, you'd be horrified at that thought? In other words, by your emotional reaction, you obviously care more about your little finger than you do about a bunch of strangers who live far away. But if I told you you could save your little finger by hurting the people who live far away, you'd be horrified. So what Smith is interested in is why? What's driving our behavior in that situation, given that our emotions are definitely self-interested? And Smith says, he says, we don't have a great religious desire to do good. He didn't believe that. He did not believe we were genetically, even though he didn't know about genetics, he didn't believe we were hardwired to be good. What he thought we were is hardwired to care about what other people thought of us. And he argued that we have an impartial spectator, an imaginary person who we think about when we're about to make a decision about what to do, who looks at us and judges us either positively or negatively. And that's an incredible thing. And I love this sentence of Smith's because it encapsulates this idea very, very well. He says, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. And by loved and lovely, he doesn't mean the modern meaning. He means respect. By loved, he means respected, admired, praised. So to be loved is to be important. It's that people respect you, they admire you, they praise you. And he says, we want to be loved. We naturally desire it. We're hardwired to desire the approval of other people. And I often think of it as we want to matter. We want other people to look at us and say, oh, that person's worthy. And he doesn't just say that, though. He says, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. Meaning, not the way we use lovely today, but by Smith's meaning, worthy of respect, worthy of admiration, worthy of praise, praiseworthy, and worthy of respect. So it's an incredible view of how we behave. So he doesn't think we're angels, very much doesn't believe that, doesn't believe we're saints. He thinks we do things that are kind and generous because we want to earn the respect of the people around us. And he actually believes that civilization is created through the approval and disapproval of each of us with each other by what we do. So if somebody does something that's honorable and we praise them, or we show that we respect them, that encourages that kind of behavior. And if people do things that are not good, that are cruel or selfish, not just self-interested, but selfish, we judge them and we look at them negatively, and we don't love those people. We don't praise them. We don't respect them. And if you start to think about it, you realize this is kind of the same idea as the invisible hand. These forces that are out there in the world. Smith actually argued that God, he wasn't much of a religious person. His friend David Hume was an atheist. Smith, people debate whether he's an atheist or whether he's not believed in God. But in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, Smith argues that God put this in us, and moderns would probably talk about the genetic nature, the hardwired nature, that God put in us this judgmental aspect of approval and disapproval as a way to maintain civilization. Very profound idea. Smith also, of course, realized that we can fool ourselves. We can imagine that we're lovely when in fact we're not. He had very deep and thoughtful things to say about that. The last thing I want to say is Smith had something to say about hubris, about arrogance in public policy. He talks about the man of system, a person who has a plan for how society should be arranged and who knows what's best for people. Here's what Smith says, quote, the man of system, I'm sorry, I want to read one other quote before I get to this one. When we talk about being loved and lovely, let me find the quote. Okay, here it is. So it says, we naturally want to be loved. We want to be respected, admired, praised, and we want to earn that to be actual love, not just love, but lovely. And he says there's two ways you can be loved. There's two ways to earn the approval of the people around you. One way is to be rich, powerful, or famous, right? That's the first way. Rich people, everybody looks to them. Rich, powerful people, everybody wants to know what they're interested in. Famous people, that's what people follow them, want to know what they're wearing, want to know what music they're listening to, and so on. The second way to be loved is to be wise and virtuous. Not as exciting. But so it says, if you know what's best for you, you should try to be wise and virtuous instead of rich, famous, and powerful. So Smith is in many ways the father of modern capitalism, but he didn't believe that the pursuit of riches and money for its own sake was a good idea. In fact, he would suggest it's not so good for you. So here's the quote. To desire, to acquire, and to enjoy the respect and admiration of mankind are the great objects of ambition and emulation. So what he's saying there is that we're ambitious, we want to be successful, and we want to emulate people we respect. And then he says, two different roads are presented to us, equally leading to the attainment of this so much desired object, meaning we want to be respected and loved and admired. And there's two ways to get there. The one, by the study of wisdom and the practice of virtue. The other, by the acquisition of wealth and greatness. Two different characters are presented to our emulation. And we could imitate two different kinds of people. The one of proud ambition and ostentatious avidity. Avidity, I think, means pursuit of wealth. The other of humble modesty and equitable justice. Two different models, two different pictures are held out to us according to which we may fashion our own character and behavior. The one more gaudy and glittering in its coloring, the other more correct and more exquisitely beautiful in its outline. The one forcing itself upon the notice of every wandering eye, the other attracting the attention of scarce anybody but the most studious and careful observer. So what he's saying there is that riches and fame and power, they're very seductive. We realize that if we can get those things, people will look up to us and respect us and admire us. Saying that's a bad choice. And he talks at more great length about how it can degrade you and it's not good for you. Instead, you should take the quieter path, the less glittering, less gaudy path of wisdom and virtue. You know, it's ironic because Smith's one of the most famous people of all time, but he didn't pursue it. So the last thing I want to say was about hubris. Smith, this is another different quote. It's a beautiful image. He talks about the man of system who has a plan for society. The man of system is apt to be very wise in his own conceit and is often so enamored with the supposed beauty of his own ideal plan of government that he cannot suffer the smallest deviation from any part of it. He seems to imagine he can arrange the different members of a great society with as much ease as the hand arranges the different pieces upon a chessboard. He does not consider that the pieces upon the chessboard have no other principle of motion beside that which the hand impresses upon them. In other words, he doesn't think about the fact that the pieces might have their own ideas about where they want to go, but that in the great chessboard of human society, every single piece has a principle of motion of its own, altogether different from that which the legislature might choose to impress upon it. So what Smith's saying here is that it's related to his ideas about emergent order. You can't move people around like chess pieces on a chessboard because they have their own desires that you are completely often unaware of. You have very imperfect information. The legislature often has imperfect information. Smith wrote this in 1759, but it reads as a warning for every utopian project of the next 250 years and every revolution that promised to make society from scratch. Thomas Sowell riffs on this idea in his very interesting book called A Conflict of Visions. He said there's two different visions of humanity. One, we're constrained in what people can be made to do because they're complicated and they have their own motion, as Smith would say. But then there's the unconstrained vision. Oh, you can just remake human beings. You can make them into this new Soviet man or woman who's going to not be self-interested and is going to want to share and so on. And tragically, the urge to remake society often has very negative consequences. Okay, I am going to close by saying one brief thing about my college where I'm president here in Jerusalem, Shalem. It's a very unusual college. It's 75 students admitted every year. The first year, they all study the same thing. The Iliad, the Odyssey, Plato, Aristotle, Western history, Jewish history. They read the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, the Quran. They learn biology. They learn some neuroscience. It's a crazy place. And then they go off and they major in either philosophy and Jewish thought, Middle East and Islamic studies, where they become fluent in Arabic, or strategy, diplomacy, and security, which prepares them for diplomacy and out in the world. And of course, we're in the middle of a war. It's quiet. The war isn't going actively right now, but we've been attacked by, I don't know, you can debate how many places, but we've been under attack now since October 7th from Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, and Yemen at a minimum. And it's hard because the Israeli army, contrary to the horrible things that are said about it, and of course, like any army, it's full of imperfection. They're not a bunch of saints. Adam Smith would understand that. But here there's a draft, so virtually everybody serves in the army. There are exceptions we can talk about if you're interested, but almost all of our students have been in the army. So they come to us, they're 25 years old. So on October 7th, 2023, when that war broke out, we were attacked by Hamas out of Gaza, about half of our students or more had to go back to fight, even though they're done with their army service, because the Israeli army is built on an enormous set of reserves, people who go back and stay in shape and serve if they're needed. So
they just got called up, essentially.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. People got on went to incredible lengths to get back here on October 7th, 8th, and 9th because they wanted to defend their country. It was an amazing ad for El Al Airlines of people who were climbing on Mount Everest on October 7th, which Israelis love Nepal and the East. And they got home and they came and fought. And of course, many of them died. So Shalem College lost a student on October 7th. Two students of ours got in a car on October 7th. They weren't called up. They just knew there was trouble, and they went down to fight and to liberate the kibbutzes and other villages that were attacked on October 7th. And one of them didn't come back. His name was Amir Sakuri. He would have graduated this June. He left a wife and two children. He came to Shalem when he was 31 years old, fell in love with Homer, and died tragically on October 7th. So we're starting a scholarship in his name. If you'd like to contribute to that scholarship or just to contribute to Shalem College, Tom can tell you how to do that. That's my pitch for that. And happy to open up to questions on anything you want. Israel, Adam Smith, economics, Homer, where I'm reading the Iliad right now. Heck of a book, let me tell you. Well, its reputation is well deserved.
Russ, I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. No, let's see. Am I muted? Okay, there we go.
No, I hear you.
Um, there we go. Okay, thanks so much. By the way, I just want to tell all of our attendees that IPI is going to be making a $1,000 contribution to that scholarship fund in
Thank you, Tom.
appreciation of Russ's joining us. And I know that several of our attendees have also already made donations, and those will be forwarded along to that same fund. If you are interested in making a donation to support the scholarship in the name of this very honorable man and a very honorable institution that's trying to do really good things, we would encourage you to do so. I guess that link, Russ, is Shalem, Shalem. Let's see. I had it here. Now it's gone.
I can find it.
Here we go. I found it. I found it. Okay, so it's shalem.ac.il and /donate. And there you can have an opportunity there to make a gift toward that scholarship. Uh, and if you have any questions, if you didn't get the link or whatever, you can always just email us here at IPI, and we'll make sure that you get connected. Um,
And
just
I'm
personally,
I'm
Russ, I
Russ
think what. Go ahead.
I'm Russ Roberts, RussRoberts, Russ Roberts at Gmail. If you have any,
There
if
you
you want
go.
information about that, or if you just want to react to what I said tonight, happy to hear from you.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And again, you can always contact us here at IPI. We'll be sure to get you connected and get you that link. By the way, Russ, it's interesting. We here in Texas have sort of a new startup university too, the University of
Yeah,
Austin, that
correct.
is trying to do a lot of the same things, not all the
I
same,
agree. Yep.
but start a startup focusing on the great books, focusing on on philosophy and worldview and all those sorts of things. And your institution is, what did you say? Did you say 10 years in?
It's 14 years that
14
we're
years
having our
in.
10th graduating class this
Yeah.
June.
And at the U of AX, I think they're only like 2 years in right now, but it is a noble work trying to start an institution from scratch like that,
Yeah, it's amazing.
as opposed to just sitting back and complaining, right? Which we've been
That's
doing
right.
for far too long. So that's great. I have several questions I want to ask you before we turn things over
Sure.
to the audience, but I want to remind folks, if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you just want a reaction to a thought, you can put it in. You can use the Q&A function down on your menu bar. Go over to More, click on Q&A, and type it in there, and we'll make a point of getting to it. So Russ, when you mentioned the danger of hubris, my mind immediately went to Hayek and the knowledge problem. Uh, and obviously they're related, but I mean, Hayek is thinking specifically about the hubris of government, right? Whereas it
Yep.
seems like from what you said about Smith, he's thinking much more about human nature than he is, about government in the discussion of hubris. What would you say is a relationship between Smith's thoughts about hubris and Hayek's knowledge problem?
Well, Hayek, they're related, obviously, as you point out. Hayek obviously is a student of Smith in the intellectual sense. Uh, they're both worried about government. They're both worried about what we might call overreach and the inability to have sufficient information to make good decisions. In the case of Hayek, I mean, he had a lot to say about a lot of places, but when he was talking about the knowledge problem, he was mainly talking about the idea that we don't have enough knowledge of people's preferences to satisfy them from the top down, and we needed a decentralized processing decision-making system, which we call the market, to allocate things and both decide how much to produce, and then allocate them. They both were worried about overreach from government and the tendency. What Smith was writing about is the tendency of legislators and leaders to ignore the desires of people to do what they wanted to do. It's an enormous. I mean, just to take a simple example, the war on drugs is been, I would argue, a tragic failure, led to lots of violence and death, as of course drugs do also. But it's weird that in our attempt to stop that death, we've caused a lot more people probably to die than otherwise would have. Uh, Perhaps well intentioned. I don't know if it is or it isn't, but whatever its intentions were, it hasn't eliminated drugs. Why not? We've been fighting the war for decades. The answer is people like to take drugs. You could debate whether they should or shouldn't, what kind of drugs they shouldn't be allowed to take. But the attempt to stop people from doing what they want to do often leads to unintended consequences. I think that really was what Smith's main point was.
It reminds me of your illustration about the paths at the university. Our mutual friend Jonah Goldberg has this anecdote. I don't know if it's true or not, but if I'm remembering it correctly, uh, there was a head of an institution who basically said, let's hold off a year on, putting in the sidewalks, so let's see where the students actually walk,
Yeah,
right? And then
smart. Yeah,
let's put the sidewalks there.
yeah,
That's much more of a sort of a Hayekian approach, right?
agreed.
Let's
Yeah,
not try to determine
absolutely.
where people walk. Let's see where they walk, and we'll just facilitate it and make sure that mud doesn't accumulate.
That's right. Yeah, that's lovely. I'm with you. I don't know if it's a true story, but it's a good one.
Yeah, no, it's good. Um, Smith wrote Theory on Moral Sentiments, his sort of philosophical work on human nature and all of that before The Wealth of Nations. And I wonder if it had to be like that, because a lot of what's in The Wealth of Nations seems to me that it's his observations from human nature and history rather than it seems like, and it's been years since I've read it, but it seems like instead of trying to create some sort of economic framework, what he's just doing is he's saying, this is what human nature is, this is how people behave, this is how things actually are in the actual world, and governments should try to follow, not lead. What's your reaction to that? Is that accurate? Is that a fair characterization?
Well, his insights into human nature are complicated. Economists tend to simplify because they want to, in modern academic life, they want to represent human beings as mathematical entities, which is elegant, but I think simplification that often is not so helpful. But the economist's view of human nature is very simple. It's that we try to get more out of things than we otherwise would, and we try to pursue things that we like. And in that level, it's kind of banal and not very profound or interesting. But there's a certain calculating, what modern economists call maximizing aspect to it, as if the goal of life is to get as much of the things you like as possible. Now, the things you like could be non-monetary. They don't all have to be things. They don't have to be stuff. They can be respect and admiration and love, the things that Smith wrote about in his other book. But the way most economists end up writing about it is that we're trying to explain why people work where they work, and why they eat and consume and buy what they buy. And we assume they do it rationally. That when things get expensive, they try to get less of them. They try to buy less of those things and substitute other things. And of course, broadly speaking, that's a very helpful way to look at the world. Where I would sum it up is not so much that people are maximizing, like they're sitting around with a calculator trying to figure out the best combination of things that they want to buy at the grocery, but rather that we're trying to do better. We respond. The simplest way to say it, we respond to incentives, and that's a profoundly simple truth. And Smith believed in it. In that sense, he was an economist, not just a philosopher. The implications of that for policy are more complicated. Smith had what my former colleague at George Mason, Dan Klein, called a presumption of liberty. His view was, let's start with the idea that freedom's a good thing, and interfering with freedom is not a good thing. Now, there are exceptions to that. Smith knew it, talked about them, but his presumption was that it was best that human beings be left to pursue their own well-being because they understood it better than others. Now, we understand that people are imperfect. They don't understand everything about themselves or about the world around them. They make mistakes. They fool themselves. Of course, this is all true, but the idea that government could do that better, it's most of the time isn't true. Sometimes it is. I'm not an anarchist. Smith wasn't an anarchist. He didn't believe in no government. He just believed in constraining and limiting the role of government in people's everyday lives for most things. And I think that was the right impulse.
Your sort of brief discourse on the invisible hand was really interesting because I think this is an area where Smith has really become sort of mischaracterized by people, even well-meaning people, right? Because when you see the phrase invisible hand, it implies guidance, right? And what Smith is, it seems to me that what Smith is saying is not that there's an invisible hand, but that there is the illusion of an invisible hand, right?
Yeah, that's
It,
right.
it,
Right.
it is an illusion. It's the sum total of all of these decisions and choices being made by people from the bottom up, and the fact that things work out. It's sort of an illusion is that there's a guiding hand at that.
Correct.
And
Well, that's why it's invisible. That's the sense in
yeah,
which that it's an illusion. It's not an actual hand. It's an
yeah,
invisible. It's a
yeah,
we would call it more like a virtual hand rather than
yeah. There you go. There you go.
an actual hand. But
Yeah.
the metaphor is very colorful.
Yeah. So that sort of takes me to this issue of what do we know about Smith's sort of theology or religious beliefs? Because there's a distinct lack of appeals to divine authority in Smith's work, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Even
he's not.
though even though almost everyone at that time was, somewhere on a continuum between a deist, and a theist. Um, what do we know about his views of, theology and religion and how that relates to human nature? Because a ton of his arguments come out of human nature rather than out of some sort of divine order.
Yeah. So, as I'll mention in passing, there's a lot of debate and scholarship about how religious Smith was, not religious in the sense of church going, but what his actual beliefs were. And as I said, his best friend was a prominent and proud atheist. Um, People have suggested that when Smith did allude to divine forces, he was doing it to protect his position in universities that were government owned, run, or that he was trying to avoid being canceled, we would say in modern parlance. I have no idea. I don't think it's really that interesting. But uh, what Smith does say is what I said before, that he says that God, doesn't call him God, he calls him the author of nature, meaning whoever made the world around us. In that sense, he's not a Anglican or a
Yeah,
Catholic. He
right.
may have some belief in a first mover, divine creator. Say whatever made the world around us. And of course, it lived before Darwin, so he couldn't have explained it with evolution. He said whatever authority made the world around us, put certain things in us, and those are what we call human nature. So in that sense, he's a theist of some kind, a deist of some kind. But we don't really know. We don't have. We can't ask him anymore. So
And in a way, it doesn't matter because,
yeah, I don't.
well, again, not to double down on the Jonah Goldberg thing, but Jonah's recent book starts off with like there is no God in this book, and he's not saying I don't believe in a God. He's saying I'm not appealing to divine authority,
Right.
right?
Correct.
And
Yes.
it seems to me that there's a lot of similarity there. The Smith is he goes out of his way to not appeal to divine authority,
Yeah.
which at his time was what virtually everyone else
It was
did,
somewhat.
right?
Yeah, it was somewhat controversial. Not to, but although I do wonder. People assume that everybody in the 19th century believed in God, and they also assume that almost nobody today does. And I think there was a lot of skepticism in the 19th century, but Obviously, David Hume was a prime example. But as for Smith, we don't really know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we've got several questions coming in, but I want to squeeze in a couple more of my own. Um, we have not, well, either you use the word mercantilism once or not at all in your
No, I
talk.
used it once. I used it
Okay.
once.
And a lot of what Smith is responding to in The Wealth of Nations is mercantilism.
Correct.
And for me and for groups like IPI, we've been really troubled recently by the sort of return of mercantilist thinking
Yep.
in Trump administration policy and that kind of thing. So I think it's worth spending a few minutes on this. I think it's worth explaining what mercantilism was during Smith's time, how he explained the futility of mercantilism or the counterproductivity of mercantilism, and how, is it fair to say we're slipping back into some of that thinking today?
Well, I think it's a little bit complicated. Parts of it are not complicated. Let's start with the not complicated part. The not complicated part is that trade generally between nations makes both parties better off, both countries. Although within a country, the trades, there may be people who are harmed by trade. Not every single human being every single citizen is going to have their lot improved by trade with a foreign country. If your skills are similar to the skills that are prevalent in that foreign country, you may find your prospects harmed. But I think so. I think some of what President Trump and people who are advocating certain trade policies, what they're wrong about is to argue that because America buys more stuff from China than China buys from America, there's some kind of nefarious cheating going on. And that's not true. America buys more from China than China buys from the United States. China invests more in America than Americans invest in China. Those are the same things. There are goods that go across borders, and then there's assets, property, and investments. So if America is a very good place to invest, which it is, a lot of money is going to flow into the United States. And right now, a lot of money is flowing into Israel because the economy is doing incredibly well, incredible amount of innovation here. So that gives our country here in Israel, or Americans in America, foreign currency to spend elsewhere. And they can spend it on goods or they can invest it. If they think the investments are better in the United States than in China, they're going to invest in America, and they're not going to buy so much from the Chinese, or vice versa. They might decide there's a lot of inexpensive and attractive products in China, and I'll use the investment money that came in here to buy products that China makes very inexpensively. There's nothing nefarious going on in that. So in that sense, I think the so-called Trump doctrine of trade, which I'm not going to try to articulate because I couldn't, but the general feeling that somehow Americans are being taken advantage of is I think, incorrect. There are places that where Americans taken advantage of. Take an obviously simple example. American government, particularly Medicare, is not allowed to negotiate drug prices. It's against the law. So if they want a drug, if Medicare wants to provide a drug for seniors, citizens in America who are under Medicare, it has to pay the price that the manufacturer sets. That might be a good thing. Might not be. We debate whether that's appropriate, whether the government should be influencing the price of medical services or pharmaceuticals by negotiating and so on. But what is true for sure is that foreign governments don't feel that way. So they negotiate with drug companies in America. They say, look, if you want access to our market, here's the price. And they set low prices. Obviously, they try. So what happens in that world is that Americans, through their taxes to pay for Medicare and the pharmaceuticals that Medicare provides, end up subsidizing an enormous portion of the innovation that occurs in the pharmaceutical industry. But the other nations around the world are free riding on American innovation. Now, I don't follow the ins and outs of Trump economic policy anymore. I used to, and fortunately, I live here in America.
Lucky you. Lucky you.
Lucky me. I don't have to figure it out anymore and have an opinion on it. But it is true that foreign nations are able to take advantage of the United States in that way, whether it's Canadians or others. And similarly, you can debate whether America should have a big army or not, and whether it should be used in the places it's used. But it's certainly true that a lot of that cost is paid for by Americans, even though many of the benefits accrue to Europe, say in terms of protection from Russian and other possible security threats. Now, you can say, well, America shouldn't defend Europe. That's a mistake. That's fine. That's a legitimate position. But if we think we should, it's weird that Trump's insight, I think, is basically right, that the rest of the world lets America pay for it. And that's weird. That's not attractive. So, but to go back to, I got derailed there. The idea of mercantilism, the idea that the trade is one-sided, I think, is a very unhealthy idea. And usually when people trade, both sides are better off, or they wouldn't have traded to start with. So mercantilism is this 800 or so year old idea that you want to try to accumulate. When you trade with people, the idea is to get gold, or in our modern times, to run a trade surplus as if that's the road to prosperity. It's not, just not true.
I'm glad you finally got around to sort of explaining the basic idea of mercantilism because, again, riff on this or correct me, but the idea of mercantilism was the purpose of trade is, in fact, to take advantage of the people you're trading with,
Yeah,
right?
which is it's not a healthy.
Right,
Everybody can't do that.
right,
It's not a universal principle that all nations can follow by definition.
right. Exactly, exactly. So, I've written several times, and we at IPI here are fond of this idea that the whole idea of talking about nations trading with nations is kind of stupid because
Not healthy. Yeah,
people trade with people, right? I mean, no one in the United States talks about Texas having a trade deficit with Oklahoma. Nobody
correct.
talks about Denton County, Texas having a trade deficit with Dallas County, Texas, right? But somehow when we get to the national level, that's how the conversation is characterized, is with
Yeah,
US trade with China or US trade with Mexico.
it taps into our nationalist temptations, just like we tend to root for our home country in the Olympics or the World Cup, which doesn't make any sense, literally, in the sense of justice, or right. It's a natural temptation to feel that that's also true about, say, trade, but that's a dangerous temptation, and it's not healthy. It
Do
doesn't
you do
lead to
you agree
prosperity.
with do you agree with the sort of hyperbolic declaration that trade deficits don't matter?
Well, I wouldn't say they don't matter, but I don't think they're representative of anything nefarious or harmful. Um, as I suggested, a trade deficit is usually the flip side of it. What's is called capital surplus, right?
Right.
If you import more than you export in goods, you're going to import more than you export in capital. It's just the way it's almost a mathematical equation. There's a role for currency in that conversation too that complicates it a little bit, but in general, a trade deficit is it's that word deficit, which makes it sound like it's a bad thing. If China wants to sell us a lot of stuff really cheaply, that's kind of good for us. That's why we want to buy it. It's not a horrible thing. Now, it can be hard on some people who want to make things that China also makes. We understand that. But in general, for America as a whole, it's going to be good to buy things that are less expensive than there are things that are more expensive. It's not complicated.
Yeah, I mean, sort of the immediate application of that thinking is this issue where China is like exporting these very inexpensive electric cars, right? And the U.S. has done everything they can to make that illegal to bring them into the U.S. And so you've got this funny thing going on at the Texas-Mexico border where you suddenly see, if you hang around the border, you suddenly see a bunch of Chinese electric cars, right? And
Uh,
they come across the border. They can't be sold in the United States. They can't be serviced in the United States. And from a sort of from a free trade libertarian standpoint, my inclination is to think if China wants to sell us a bunch of cheap electric cars, let them. Let's take advantage of it, right? I mean, instead of forcing U.S. car makers to make electric cars, why don't we just double down on, fossil fuel cars and let China sell the electric cars?
I didn't, is it really, it's illegal? Nobody
Yeah,
sells.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. They're absolutely banned,
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, that's
and they're
interesting.
not just banned to
Okay.
be sold. They're banned from U.S. highways. So, like, if you bought one in Mexico where we're driving it around in Dallas, that's actually a violation of federal law.
They're everywhere here in Israel. They're very popular. People do worry about their accumulating electronic information. I don't know if that's a legitimate worry or not,
Hmm.
but they're legal and there are a ton of them here.
Okay, I have one more thing I want to touch on, and that is I want to relate the idea of mercantilism to zero-sum thinking.
Okay.
Because it's been my observation, for instance, that Donald Trump is very much, and I know you don't want to focus on Trump and the Trump administration, but it's been my observation that he very much lives in a world of zero-sum thinking, that for somebody to have something, they have to take it away from somebody else. And if somebody else has something, they must have taken it from us. And it influences, I think, the trade with China question and all that sort of stuff. Is it part of Smith's argument is that zero sum thinking makes no sense in economics, that in trade both parties are better off? Anytime there's a voluntary transaction, both parties are by definition better off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'm not going to try to get into Donald Trump's head, but if you grow up and your business career is basically negotiating real estate deals, it's natural to be tend to believe in a zero sum world because a dollar you leave on the table is a dollar the other person gets, a dollar you grab is a dollar the other person can't have. But of course, that's really just the beginning of what trade, making a deal, is about.
Hmm.
Um, I do think zero, again, not to speculate on Trump's thinking on this, but zero sum thinking is true in certain things. But in general, in economics, it's not true. Both parties get better off. And the easiest way to see that is to think about the world standard of living. We have something like 8 billion people in the world, and the average standard of living is immensely greater than it was 100 years ago. Who did we take it from? The Martians? Where did it come from?
Right, right.
Who has less now that people have more? And the answer is no one. Somehow, prosperity, growth, innovation, technology allowed everybody to get better off. Now, at any one time, there could be, a negotiation or a deal that turns out to harm one person because they made a mistake and they shouldn't have made the deal. But in general, economic activity grows the pie. The pie gets bigger. It's not I get a bigger piece and therefore you get a smaller piece. So it's a weird thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I mean, that idea has been a big part of sort of IPI's work on trade and economics. So I just wanted to make sure we make sure we covered that. I got several questions from folks. One is I'm just going to read it pretty much verbatim. You were deeply concerned about the narrative that emerged from the 2008 financial crisis. What concerns you the most about the economy in 2026 and why? It's not clear to me from the question what the relationship would be from the 2008 financial crisis and 2026, but
Well,
can you
I
take a
think
shot
I
at
think the
that?
question is I think it's a reference to what people are worried about. I think the in 2008, I thought we drew, as we often do, the consensus lesson was the wrong lesson. It's just like I think we drew the wrong lesson from COVID. Um, and that's another story. But the thing that worries me about the economy today is that um, it's so easy to get people worked up about anything. And if AI has an impact on employment, and it's not clear to me it's going to have a negative impact, but a lot of people are worried that it could. The ability of a demagogue to come along and promise to save people from it scares me. So I would say that's the scariest thing. I am a little worried about. I'm not worried about AI taking over the world or killing people to turn them into paper clips, which some people are. But I do worry about a world where it might be a period of time where a lot of people struggle to support themselves and their family without help from, say, the government. And that's probably not a good world. That'll be a difficult transition that we're going to have to make if that's the way it turns out. I don't know, but Stephen, it's nice to hear from you. I'm glad you're listening.
Our friend Dan Ogden asks a question, a question about trade. Is it true? It is true that free trade works if both countries have little or no restrictions, but if trade breaks down where one country's rules and practices result in market distortions, how can that be counteracted without resort to counteraction? So I think this is a real common thing. Like
It
you
is.
think about like Brazil's sugar subsidies, right? So a lot of our trade policy in the sugar area is a reaction to the fact that Brazil subsidizes sugar production, gives low interest government loans to sugar producers, things like that. And so the argument, I think, within sort of the center right slash libertarian world has always been so, it should the right answer be so what? If Brazil wants to subsidize sugar, sell us cheap sugar, why not let American consumers take advantage of it? Right?
So that part is true. However, I think that there is a legitimate worry, although I don't think it's common, which is that they could jerk around that policy, drive some people out of business, and then bring it back. And
Right.
there are issues, I think, of transition that could be concerning. But the idea that somehow, let's take a better example, a different example. If somebody if a government wants to subsidize something and sell it to me cheaply, and they're going to do it for a long time, I should be happy to take it as the consumer. I can understand somebody who produces that good will resent that, but that has nothing to do with free trade. It is true that in the real world, not every nation practices free trade. That does not mean that we should also not practice free trade. So if the United States, if other countries keep out foreign goods, like American goods, say, and the question is, what is the implication of that for us? And for me, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any implication for us. We can still pursue free trade. We can still open our borders to goods and services coming in, and I think we'll still be better off. So when Daniel asks, is free trade works if both countries have little or no restriction? Free trade works even if the other country does have a restriction. You can debate whether you should try to open up their economy for their citizens. That'd be a weird thing, right? If say, China is subsidizing a product for sale overseas and punishing its own citizens, either in the form of taxes to finance that or other restrictions, yeah, that's a bad thing for them. But why should we imitate them and hurt our own citizens by keeping out their products? Now,
No.
I accept the possibility that there can be nefarious things going on with, I don't know, related to national security, maybe. There are examples, but you don't want to argue, I think. So I disagree with the comment. You don't want to argue that, well, since some people practice some policies that are, say, responses to, let me take a better example. Japan restricts the import of rice. There's a small but politically powerful group of rice producers in Japan, and they make sure that foreign rice is kept out or minimally allowed in. There are a lot of restrictions on it. And I used to have students who come from Japan when I taught in America, and they were always telling me how surprised they were that American rice was pretty good, because they had been told all their life, oh, we have to keep it out of Japan because it's so horrible. It's the worst kind of rice. It's low quality. It's disgusting. So we have to protect people and keep our rice. No, the reason they kept our rice is that they wanted to keep the price of rice high in Japan for the benefit of Japanese rice makers who were politically powerful. So what should we as Americans do that? Well, I understand that American rice makers don't like it. They certainly want to have the chance to sell rice in Japan freely. I understand that the Japanese consumers don't like it. They would like to have access to cheaper rice if they knew that it was actually okay. But are we going to really try to move our trade policy to help Japan's political system work more fairly? I mean, it's not a good strategy. I would much rather let them make their expensive rice, harm their people through their own messed up political system. We do it all the time, by the way. You gave the example of sugar. There's a handful of sugar producing companies in America. They're in two places. They're in Florida and I think South Dakota. One is making sugar from sugarcane in Florida, and one's making it from sugar beets in the Dakotas. And America keeps out foreign sugar. They have huge quotas. They're small quotas, restrictions on importing sugar. That's terrible for American consumers. They have to pay more for anything that has sugar in it. It's great for the handful of politically powerful people in Florida and South Dakota who make a lot of contributions to political campaigns, or North Dakota, wherever it is. But there's all these restrictions. No, there's no such thing as perfect free trade anywhere or perfect free markets anywhere. So the question is, given that that's true, that there's imperfections, how do you make things better? And I would say the answer is you make it better by letting people buy what they want, where they want, and when they want. And I
should point out that in the trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, negotiated over many years, we had actually gotten Japan to loosen up some on its restrictions against the importation of American rice. And of course, one of the first things that President Trump did in 2016 was take us out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So, I mean, historically, part of the way we have tried to leverage access to U.S. markets has been through trade agreements, right? I mean, we want you to have greater respect for our intellectual property. We want you to play by the rules. We want you to pay your share of drug development. Although normally the way we've done that is through trade agreements. And the Trump administration has substituted tariffs for trade agreements as a form of leverage.
Well, all I'll say is that although I don't live in the United States anymore, I do come to visit, and I am appreciative that Lafroig whiskey from the United Kingdom evidently is going to have a lower tariff than otherwise would have because King Charles came through town. So
yeah, there you
some
go.
things to be grateful for.
Absolutely. Well, you're a Lafroig man. You like that peaty stuff, apparently.
I do. I like Lagavulin, Lafroig, and
Lagavulin and all of that. Yeah.
Ardbeg.
Okay, so I want to make one more. I want to give you one more thing to respond to that was related to what we were just talking about. It seems to me that there is a principle, and I think can be implied from Smith, that consumer welfare should almost always be prioritized over producer welfare. Is that fair? And would you like to riff on that for just a bit?
Yeah, it's hard to explain that, I think, but I think it's true. I think it is true that Smith would say that. Ultimately, I'm going to put a caveat on this, but ultimately we care about we're all consumers, whether you're a producer or not. You still have to eat and buy stuff and pursue things you care about and enjoy. So ultimately, life is about what we can enjoy. It's not all about physical consumption and stuff. It can also be about walks in the woods and explorations of French poetry and whatever else floats your boat. But ultimately, what we enjoy in life is what counts, I think Smith would say. And I think that's a pretty good starting place for policy. And the reason is that, when a company dies, no one dies. Some people may have to find new work. If you have a decent labor market, as the United States does, dynamic labor market, the workers will be reemployed somewhere else fairly soon. If you don't, it's pretty unpleasant for a company to go away. And you could understand that in a system that has less flexible labor markets, political power would generally push governments to pay more attention to workers' situation and to what happens to companies and so on. That might be valuable politically in the short run. In the long run, I'd argue that approach, which is very European, as opposed to American, has cost Europe a lot of innovation. There was a study that came out, I don't know if it's true, but it was a list of colleges that produce the most founders of startups over the last decade. And the number one college was UC Berkeley. This is in total numbers. And the second was, I think, Stanford. And there were two Israeli companies in the 15 that were listed, two Israeli universities, Technion and Tel Aviv University. There was not a single university from Europe. Now, maybe it's a bad study. I don't know. Maybe it was rigged. Maybe they didn't look at any European universities. I don't really know. But it's certainly true that America and Israel are much more innovative, I think, than Europe is on average. And that's even without correcting for per capita differences. So a lot of policies which make sense politically in the short run have high costs in the long run. And
And
Tom,
I should mention,
I should probably go to bed here.
yeah,
It's
we're gonna
almost
drop.
10:30.
We're gonna drop. I just wanted to mention, related to what you just said, Dan Senor's book, Startup Nation, talking about Israel, talking about the innovation and everything you're talking about there. So that's
Incredibly
worth
innovative
reading for
place.
anyone who's interested in pursuing that.
Yep.
All right, well, Russ, we very much appreciate your time this evening. I know it's later there than it is here. Thanks so much. That was terrific. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure that our participants enjoyed it. And again, this will be archived on IPI's website and on our YouTube channel for people to see later on. So, and we'll promote it as much as we possibly can because this is good stuff that everybody needs to hear. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, listeners. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Bye bye.
And that's it, folks. So thanks so much for joining us. Feel free to reach out to us here at IPI if you have any questions or comments. If you'd like to get connected with Professor Roberts, just let us know. We'll be happy to set that up. And from everyone here at IPI, just say thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.